everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing the in or out book tag. I was tagged by Cara from Wild Book Garden, so I'll link her video and the original creator's video in the description below, but this is a tag that there are 26 topics and you talk through whether you are in or out on this topic, whether you like it or you don't. So there are 26, which is going to be quite a few, so let's just dive into it. I have the questions right here. I only remember a few of them because I haven't looked at them since watching Cara's video, so let's dive in. Topic 1 is reading the last page first. I am out on this. I have never done the read the last page first thing. I used to read the last word on the last page first, for no real reason. It tells you nothing. There's no real reason to do that. And that's, I think, why I stopped doing it. I never consciously decided I'm not gonna do this anymore. I just stopped after a while because I forgot that I did it, because there's no reason. There's no reason to do that. So I'm out on reading the last page first. Topic 2 is enemies to lovers. And this is a romance trope that I just don't have a very strong feeling about. I don't hate enemies to lovers, but I also don't particularly care for it. It's definitely not a buzzword that would make me go, oh, I need to read this. So I'm gonna say out, not because I hate it, but just because I'm I don't care, and that's not a thing that would entice me. There are definitely other romance tropes that I have enjoyed more, and I can't think of an instance of enemies to lovers that I really liked. So we're gonna say out. Number 3 is dream sequences, and I'm out on this also. Most of the time, I don't really understand why they're there. I don't think that they're really necessary a lot of times. Very often they're confusing. I think the information could have been conveyed in a much simpler way. And a lot of times they're just really drawn out and just sort of divert the story and the momentum. And I'm just why? There are exceptions to this. I think there are some instances that, maybe there are some good dream sequences, but most of the time, out. Number 4 is love triangles. This is another romance trope that I'm kind of in the middle on. I'm gonna say out. Again, not because I hate it. I don't dislike love triangles on principle. And it's not something that I love necessarily. And I think that very often, if there's going to be romantic tension and drama and all of that, I think I would just rather it come from some other source other than a love triangle and choosing between, two people. And also it always creates this annoying rivalry between two of them. It just, I don't know. In general, I'm gonna say out, but it's not it's something that I just hate. I'm just kind of eh. Number 5 is cracked spines, and this is the first one that I am in. I am in on cracked spines. On paperbacks, I love cracking spines on books. Sometimes I will specifically crack the spine every certain number of pages so that it's evenly spaced. It's just so satisfying to crack spines. Also, if you read mass market paperbacks, it's impossible to read it comfortably without cracking the spine. And I know not everybody likes mass market paperbacks, but I really like mass markets. I like the size of them. I find them very cute. So I enjoy mass market paperback, but you definitely have to crack a spine to read a mass market. But I also just enjoy it. And it doesn't bother me the way that it looks. I don't mind my books looking a little bit worn. I don't think that my books need to look, pristine and untouched in order to look good on my shelves. I don't mind them looking like they're a little bit worn, that they've been read and handled. So yeah, I'm in on cracking spines. I like it. Number 6 is back to my small town. And this is a trope that I don't feel like I've encountered very often, because I think that it is a trope that comes up more frequently in books that take place in the real world, like contemporary literary fiction, romance, maybe, I don't know, does it come up in horror? I have no idea. But it's not a trope that I think comes up frequently in like high fantasy books, which is most of what I've read. So I can't think of very many instances The only book that comes to mind that was a back to my small town story was Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen, and I enjoyed that one. So I'll say in. I don't know if I have enough experience with this trope to like really have an opinion, but I don't dislike it, so we'll say in. Number 7 is monsters are regular people. And what I'm assuming this means is that there are like monsters, whether they are like vampires or werewolves or some other kind of monster, and they're just like living their regular mundane lives, just being regular people out in the world. And I'm out on this one. I don't really like monsters as characters that much, and I don't really like that kind of story. I don't know if I have a strong reason for it. I'm out. I don't really like that trope that much. Number 8 is no paragraph breaks, and I'm out on no paragraph breaks. I like paragraph breaks. I think that they are important, especially if there are long chapters. Maybe they're not as important if there are very short chapters, but especially for long chapters, you need paragraph breaks. Sometimes you just have to be able to like pause, like take a breath, or if you need to put the book down for a sec, like, and it's in the middle of a chapter, paragraph breaks are important. Number 9 is multi-generational sagas, and I am in on a multi-generational saga. I feel like I kind of have to be, because one of my favorite series of all time is a multi-generational saga, which is the Seven Waters series. But even so, like, I think that's a trope that I just enjoy. I like seeing the different generations of families. I also really like it when you follow one character in like the first book, and then the next book is about like their children, and then you get to see the original character through the eyes of their children, and like what are they like, you know, as a parent and all of these years later. And like I think that's really interesting. Number 10 is rereading, and I am very much in on rereading. I love rereading. I don't do it enough, but rereading is something that I love to do. I love to revisit books and characters and worlds that I enjoy. And for me, like, rereadability is really important in a book, and that's one of the things that, like, when I'm deciding if a book is like a favorite of all time, I usually like to reread it at least once before deciding that, because like the rereadability is an important factor to me in how I feel about that book, and like, do I still love it after rereading it. Number 11 is artificial intelligence, and I'm in on artificial intelligence. I don't read a ton of sci-fi, and so I don't read a lot of books that have artificial intelligence in them, but when I do, I think I enjoy it. And I think that it always brings up some very interesting conversations and questions, especially around like, what does it mean to be human, or just to have consciousness and feelings, and what is the line between like technology and like living beings. And I always just think that those are really interesting. I always like books also that have a character who is not human in some way, but especially like a AI kind of character who is able to kind of see human behavior or society from an outside perspective and kind of reflect back some of the either like ridiculous things, horrible things, or very like wholesome things about humanity. So I like artificial intelligence. Number 12 is drop caps, and I had to look up what drop caps were, and drop caps, I guess I'm in on. I like how they look. I think that they look fancy. Sometimes I get confused if they are like too fancy and I don't realize it's a letter, and then I start trying to read and I'm like, why doesn't this sentence make sense? And it's like, you didn't read the first letter of the first word. So sometimes they confuse me because apparently can't figure out that something's a letter. But I like how they look, so I'm in on drop caps. Number 13 is happy endings, and I'm in on happy endings. I like them in general. I think what matters to me more than whether an ending is like happy or not is, does it match the rest of the book? I think Cara said something similar to this, because is the dog gonna bark? It really just matters to me if like if that ending makes sense with the book. Because if it's a book that has had a really like complicated, dark, and messy kind of story, and then it ends in a way that's just like really happy-go-lucky and everything's tied up with a neat little bow and it just like doesn't match, that's gonna annoy me. But if it's a really like fun, feel-good book that ends in like a really happy, optimistic way, I'm gonna love that happy ending because it makes sense with the rest of the story. So I love a happy ending, but really it just matters to me if the happy ending matches the rest of the story, like the tone and intention of the story as far as I understand it, and makes sense for like the characters and plot and all of that. Number 14 is plot points that only converge at the end. And I'm going to say out on that. I think that there probably are exceptions to this, but most of the time I find it frustrating when plot points only converge at the end. If you have like no indication how they're related, because then it just feels like you're reading two separate stories, and it's like, why are you telling me both of these stories if I have no idea how they're connected? And then when you have to switch between plot points or character point of views or anything, it just feels like you're being yanked around. If the stories are like parallel stories and they don't converge to the end, but throughout the book you're aware of like how they're connected or why both of these stories are being told at the same time, then that's fine. I just don't like it when it seems like completely separate stories that you have no idea why they're both being told in the same book. Number 15 is detailed magic systems, and I'm out on detailed magic systems. Another one where there can be exceptions, because like I like the Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett, and that has a pretty detailed magic system. But overall, I'm not really into detailed magic systems. I don't think that that's particularly interesting or really the point to me of reading fantasy. It's not really necessary to me to like make magic feel like it's science, I guess. It's more like I want magic to feel magical. And I think that magic does need to have its own, you know, boundaries and rules and internal logic, but I like it still when it's in a more swooshy kind of magic. I don't know how to explain it, but it's not like super detailed or what some people call like a hard magic system or something like that. I'm not super into that. And also I get kind of bored a lot of times with like really long explanations of like in-depth detail of how the magic works. I would much rather that page time be spent on things that I'm more interested in, like characters or something like that, which is part of why, even as much as I enjoy Foundry Side, I usually read those books as audiobooks. Otherwise, when they do those like long explanations of how the magic works, I would just fall asleep on the book if I wasn't listening to it. So yeah, I'm pretty much out on detailed magic systems. Number 16 is classic fantasy races, and I'm out on this also. I feel like maybe this is an unpopular opinion in the fantasy world, but I don't really like fantasy races in fantasy. I much prefer fantasy that's just like humans with magic. I'm not really into magical creatures either, but yeah, I'm particularly not really into classic fantasy races like elves and dwarves and things like that. I think the only exception might be fae. I do sometimes enjoy books with fae, but only a certain kind of fae, I guess. Because I think that there is a more modern version of fae that a lot of books are using now, and then there's a more like traditional folklore kind of fae, which is what I personally prefer. So I think fae is the one exception for like a classic fantasy race. But even within that, I'm like kind of particular about what kind of fae or how it's done. Overall, I don't love fantasy races in fantasy books, but if they're going to be there, I usually much prefer that they are like something unique to that world. Like I right now am reading Dragon Keeper by Robin Hobb, and there are these elderlings, which like that's a fantasy race, but I don't really know what they are, but they're not like a classic fantasy race. They're something that's specific and unique to that world, so I like that better. Number 17 is Unreliable Narrators, and I'm out on Unreliable Narrators. I don't understand the appeal of them. I don't think that they are enjoyable or interesting, and I just am like, why would you want to read from an unreliable narrator? I mean, for people who enjoy it, I'm glad that that exists for them, but it just makes no sense to me. And I don't enjoy it, so definitely out. Number 18 is Evil Protagonists, and I don't know how I feel about this one because I don't know if I've read enough books that are like just evil protagonists. I've definitely read ones that are morally gray or have a morally gray villain as a protagonist. I guess maybe I would be out on an evil protagonist because I feel like I would find that frustrating. I'm cool with morally gray, but I feel like if they're actually evil, maybe I wouldn't like it. Number 19 is The Chosen One, and I'll say I'm in on this one in a very half-hearted kind of way. I don't love a Chosen One story, but I also don't hate it. I could read it. I tend to prefer stories about characters who are just like normal people doing their best and they just like rise to the occasion. So that would definitely be my preference, but I can enjoy a good Chosen One story. Why not? 20 is When the Protagonist Dies. And honestly, I can't necessarily think of an example of this other than like Game of Thrones, but I didn't read that. I watched the TV show and I don't love Game of Thrones. I'm just kind of like meh about it. Anyways, I don't think I have experience with that in order to have a strong opinion about it. Number 21 is Really Long Chapters, and I'll be in on that, sure. I like both long chapters and short chapters. I think that they accomplish different things. Number 22 is French Flaps. I have never thought very intently about French Flaps, but sure, I like them. I'll say I'm in on French Flaps. Why not? Number 23 is Deckled Edges. And I'll be in on Deckled Edges too. Like, it makes it very difficult to like flip through a book, which is annoying, but it doesn't make it that difficult to, it doesn't like make it more difficult to read the book. And I like how they look, so we'll be in on Deckled Edges. 24 is Signed Copies by the Author, and I'm gonna say out on this. Not because I'm against signed copies from the author, but just because I don't care and I don't really understand the purpose of it. Like, I know lots of people are very into getting their books signed and like, that's great, but it's just never made sense to me as like a thing to do. It doesn't really add any value or intrigue to me to have a book signed by an author. I don't know. It's just not something that I've ever really cared about. So I'm gonna say out. However, it's obviously not like if I found a book that was signed by the author, I'd be like, oh, I don't want this copy because it's signed. Like, it's just not something that I would intentionally pursue, or I feel like I just don't appreciate it the way some people do. Number 25 is Dog Earring Pages, and I am against dog earring pages, or I'm out on dog earring pages. I'm cool with cracking spines, but not dog earring pages, and that is a thing that if people borrow books from me, I will tell them, like, you can crack the spine, but do not dog ear the pages. I don't know why these things are different, but they are, and I feel very strongly about it. I am out on dog earring pages. And finally, 26 is Chapter Titles instead of numbers, and I am out on that. I like chapter titles, but I also like chapter numbers, so I would not want titles instead of numbers because that would be really annoying. I would rather numbers than titles, but I want both. I would love chapter numbers and titles. All right, so that's all for the in or out book tag. Clearly, some of these I had very middle of the road opinions, and some of them I had much more distinct opinions about. I would love to know, which one of these questions do you have like the strongest opinion about, and which question do you feel most like middle of the road, no opinion either way about? I think that the one that I clearly had the strongest opinion on was Dog Earring Pages. I don't know why that's the one that I was like really intensely caring about. The ones that I have the least opinion, I feel like are usually the ones that are tropes, like enemies to lovers or love triangles. Like those ones, I just, like, it really depends on how it's done to me, so I don't have like a really strong, like, polarized opinion about it. But I'd love to know, what is your strongest and least strong opinion from these 26 topics? Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!